This is everybody today. I'd like to read a few suttas today. The subject that I'm thinking of just kind of going over in these suttas is the first hindrance, so the hindrance of sensuality, which is kama in Pali. So it's I think it's not an accident that the Buddha puts sensuality as the first hindrance. Many times when there's teachings that are ordered in lists, the most, maybe not significant, but the most like noticeable one or the most obvious, the coarsest one perhaps will be the first in the list. For example, in the five khandhas, form is the first one, and you'll see this in other places as well. So the fact that sensuality is the first hindrance means it's one that we definitely have to look at and pay attention to, and it's possibly the starting point for some of the other ones. In the teaching of Ajahn Lee that I read last time, he looks at the hindrances in this way, and he says, we kind of, our general go-to thing is that we're pursuing pleasure, and the second hindrance, for example, ill will, arises when, in the course of us pursuing pleasure, other people, situations, other things get in our way, and then we kind of develop ill will and aversion towards them. So anyway, it's one way to look at it, and so I thought I'd read two suttas. Probably I'll get to both today. I'll start with the Magandiya Sutta. So this is Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses of the Buddha. And Magandiya Sutta is Sutta 75. And there's a lot of good material in here, a lot of good teachings on the hindrances, and the main sort of category that the Buddha introduces in regards to the sensuality is the importance of seeing the origin, the disappearance. No, it's the gratification, the danger, and the escape, and that's often also paired with the origin and the cessation. So it might be the origin, the cessation, and the gratification, the danger, and the escape. And the Buddha encourages us to see sensuality in this way to really understand it. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Kuru country at a town of the Kurus named Kama-Siddhama, on a spread of grass in the fire chamber of a Brahmin belonging to the Bharadvaja clan. Then, when it was morning, the Blessed One, dressed and taking his bowl and outer robe, went into Kama-Siddhama for alms. When he had wandered for alms in Kama-Siddhama and had returned from his alms round, after his meal he went to a certain grove for the day's abiding. Having entered the grove, he sat down at the root of a tree for the day's abiding. Then the wanderer Magandiya, while walking and wandering for exercise, went to the fire chamber of the Brahmin belonging to the Bharadvaja clan. There he saw a spread of grass prepared and asked the Brahmin, "For whom has the spread of grass been prepared in Master Bharadvaja's fire chamber? It seems like a recluse's bed." "Master Magandiya, there is the recluse Gotama, the son of the Sakyans, who went forth from the Sakyan clan. Now a good report of Master Gotama has been spread to this effect. That Blessed One is indeed accomplished, fully enlightened, perfect in true knowledge and conduct, sublime, knower of worlds, incomparable leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, enlightened, blessed. This bed has been prepared for that Master Gotama. Indeed, Master Bharadvaja, it is an ill sight when we see the bed of that destroyer of growth, Master Gotama. Be careful what you say, Magandiya, be careful what you say. Many learned nobles, learned Brahmins, learned householders, and learned recluses have full confidence in Master Gotama, and have been disciplined by him in the noble true way, in the Dhamma that is wholesome. Master Bharadvaja, even if we saw that Master Gotama face to face, we would tell him to his face, the recluse Gotama is a destroyer of growth. Why is that? because that is recorded in our scriptures. So I'll just turn to a footnote. What he has translated as destroyer of growth is kind of an important point, because it's why this other recluse, Magandiya, is critical of the Buddha. So the term that's been translated as destroyer of growth is bu nahuno, and also is translated in places as a wrecker of being. But the commentary explains what this means, and I think it kind of makes sense based on what it says. It says that the view that growth should be accomplished in the six senses. So he says Magandiya has the view that growth should be accomplished in the six senses by experiencing whatever sense objects one has never experienced before, without clinging to those that are already familiar. And Bhikkhu Bodhi goes on to say, this view thus seems close to the contemporary attitude that intensity and variety of experience is the ultimate good and should be pursued without inhibitions or restrictions. So the fact that the Buddha talks about restraint of the sense faculties and the drawbacks of sensuality were probably the issues that Magandiya had with the Buddha's teachings. So Magandiya said, why is that? Why would I call him a destroyer of growth? Because that is recorded in our scriptures. And then Master Bharavaja says, if Master Magandiya has no objection, may I tell this to Master Gotama? Let Master Bharavaja be at ease. Tell him just what I have said. Meanwhile, with the divine ear, which is purified and surpasses the human, the Blessed One heard this conversation between the Brahmin of the Bharadvaja clan and the wanderer Magandiya. Then, when it was evening, the Blessed One rose from meditation, went to the Brahmin's fire chamber, and sat down in the spread of grass made ready. Then the Brahmin of the Bharadvaja clan went to the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he sat down at one side. The Blessed One asked him, Bharadvaja, did you have any conversation with the wanderer Magandiya about this spread of grass? When this was said, the Brahmin, awestruck and with his hair standing on end, replied, we wanted to tell Master Gotama about that very thing, but Master Gotama has anticipated us. But this discussion between the Blessed One and the Brahmin of the Bharadvaja clan was left unfinished, for then the wanderer Magandiya, while walking and wandering for exercise, came to the Brahmin's fire chamber and went up to the Blessed One. He exchanged greetings with the Blessed One, and when this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he sat down at one side. The Blessed One said to him, Magandiya, the eye delights in forms, takes delight in forms, rejoices in forms. That has been tamed by the Tathagata, guarded, protected, and restrained, and he teaches the Dhamma for its restraint. Was it with reference to this that you said, the recluse of Gotama is a destroyer of growth? It was with reference to this, Master Gotama, that I said the recluse Gotama is a destroyer of growth. Why is that? Because that is recorded in our scriptures. The ear delights in sound, the nose delights in odors, the tongue delights in flavors, the body delights in tangibles, the mind delights in mind objects, takes delight in mind objects, rejoices in mind objects. That has been tamed by the Tathagata, guarded, protected, and restrained, and he teaches the Dhamma for its restraint. Was it with reference to this that you said, the recluse Gotama is a destroyer of growth? It was with reference to this, Master Gotama, that I said, the recluse Gotama is a destroyer of growth. Why is that? Because that is recorded in our scriptures. What do you think, Magandiya? Here, someone may have formerly enjoyed himself with forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. On a later occasion, having understood as they actually are the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of forms, he might abandon craving for forms, remove fever for forms, and abide without thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace. What would you say to him, Magandiya? Nothing, Master Gotama. What do you think, Magandiya? Here someone may have formerly enjoyed himself with sounds cognizable by the ear, with odors cognizable by the nose, with flavors cognizable by the tongue, with tangibles cognizable by the body, that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of lust. On a later occasion, having understood as they actually are the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape, in the case of tangibles, he might abandon craving for tangibles, remove fever for tangibles, and abide without thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace. What would you say to him, Magandiya? Nothing, Master Gotama. Magandiya, formerly when I lived the home life, I enjoyed myself, provided and endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, with forms cognizable by the ear, with forms cognizable by the eye, with sounds cognizable by the ear, with odors cognizable by the nose, with flavors cognizable by the tongue, with tangibles cognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. I had 3 palaces, one for the rainy season, one for the winter, and one for the summer. I lived in the rain's palace for the 4 months of the rainy season, enjoying myself with musicians who were all female, and I did not go down to the lower palace. On a later occasion, having understood as they actually are the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of sensual pleasures, I abandon craving for sensual pleasures. I remove fever for sensual pleasures, and I abide without thirst, with the mind inwardly at peace. I see other beings who are not free from lust for sensual pleasures, being devoured by craving for sensual pleasures, burning with fever for sensual pleasures, indulging in sensual pleasures, and I do not envy them, nor do I delight therein. Why is that? Because there is, Magandiya, a delight apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, which surpasses divine bliss. Since I take delight in that, I do not envy what is inferior, nor do I delight therein. Suppose, Magandiya, a householder or a householder's son was rich, with great wealth and property, and being provided and endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, he might enjoy himself with forms cognizable by the eye, with sounds cognizable by the ear, with odors cognizable by the nose, with flavors cognizable by the tongue, with tangibles cognizable by the body, that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. Having conducted himself well in body, speech, and mind, on the dissolution of the body after death, he might reappear in a happy destination, in the heavenly world in the retinue of the gods of the 33, and there, surrounded by a group of nymphs in the Nandana grove, he would enjoy himself, provided and endowed with 5 chords of divine sensual pleasure. Suppose he saw a householder or a householder's son enjoying himself, provided and endowed with the 5 chords of human sensual pleasure. What do you think, Magandiya? Would that young god, surrounded by the group of nymphs in the Nandana grove, enjoying himself, provided and endowed with the 5 chords of divine sensual pleasure, envy the householder or the householder's son for the 5 chords of human sensual pleasure? Or would he return to human sensual pleasures? No, Master Gotama. Why not? Because heavenly sensual pleasures are more excellent and more sublime than human sensual pleasures. So too, Magandiya, formerly when I lived the home life, I enjoyed myself, provided and endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, with forms cognizable by the eye, with tangibles cognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. On a later occasion, having understood as they actually are the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of sensual pleasures, I abandon craving for sensual pleasures. I remove fever for sensual pleasures, and I abide without thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace. I see other beings who are not free from lust for sensual pleasures, being devoured by craving for sensual pleasures, burning with fever for sensual pleasures, indulging in sensual pleasures, and I do not envy them, nor do I delight therein. Why is that? Because there is, Magandiya, a delight apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, which surpasses divine bliss. Since I take delight in that, I do not envy what is inferior, nor do I delight therein. Suppose, Magandiya, there was a leper with sores and blisters on his limbs, being devoured by worms, scratching the scabs off the opening of his wounds with his nails, cauterizing his body over a burning charcoal pit. Then his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relatives, would bring a physician to treat him. The physician would make medicine for him, and by means of that medicine the man would be cured of his leprosy, and would become well and happy, independent, master of himself, able to go where he likes. Then he might see another leper with sores and blisters on his limbs, being devoured by worms, scratching the scabs off the opening of his wounds with his nails, cauterizing his body over a burning charcoal pit. What do you think, Magandiya? Would that man envy that leper for his burning charcoal pit or his use of medicine? No, Master Gotama. Why is that? Because when there is sickness, medicine has to be made, and when there is no sickness, medicine does not have to be made. So too, Magandiya, formerly when I lived the home life, and then he repeats one of the previous passages, since I take delight in that, I do not envy what is inferior, nor do I delight therein. Suppose, Magandiya, there was a leper with sores and blisters on his limbs, being devoured by worms, scratching the scabs off the opening of his wounds with his nails, cauterizing his body over a burning charcoal pit. Then his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relatives, brought a physician to treat him. The physician would make medicine for him, and by means of that medicine the man would be cured of his leprosy, and would become well and happy, independent, master of himself, able to go where he likes. Then two strong men would seize him by both arms and drag him towards a burning charcoal pit. What do you think, Magandiya? Would that man twist his body this way and that? Yes, Master Gotama. Why is that? Because that fire is indeed painful to touch, hot and scorching. What do you think, Magandiya? Is it only now that fire is painful to touch, hot and scorching? Or previously too was that fire painful to touch, hot and scorching? Master Gotama, that fire is now painful to touch, hot and scorching, and previously too that fire was painful to touch, hot and scorching. For when that man was a leper with sores and blisters on his limbs, being devoured by worms, scratching the scabs off the opening of his wounds with his nails, his faculties were impaired. Thus, though the fire was actually painful to the touch, he mistakenly perceived it as pleasant. So too, Magandiya, in the past, sensual pleasures were painful to touch, hot and scorching. In the future, sensual pleasures will be painful to touch, hot and scorching. And now at present, sensual pleasures are painful to touch, hot and scorching. But these beings who are not free from lust for sensual pleasures, who are devoured by craving for sensual pleasures, who burn with fever for sensual pleasures, have faculties that are impaired. Thus, though sensual pleasures are actually painful to touch, they acquire a mistaken perception of them as pleasant. Suppose, Magandiya, there was a leper with sores and blisters on his limbs, being devoured by worms, scratching the scabs off the opening of his wounds with his nails, cauterizing his body over a burning charcoal pit. The more he scratches the scabs and cauterizes his body, the fouler, more evil-smelling, and more infected the opening of his wounds would become. Yet he would find a certain measure of satisfaction and enjoyment in scratching the opening of his wounds. So too, Magandiya, beings who are not free from lust for sensual pleasures, who are devoured by craving for sensual pleasures, who burn with fever for sensual pleasures, still indulge in sensual pleasures. The more such beings indulge in sensual pleasures, the more their craving for sensual pleasures increases, and the more they are burned by their fever for sensual pleasures. Yet they find a certain measure of satisfaction and enjoyment in dependence on the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. What do you think, Magandiya? Have you ever seen or heard of a king or a king's minister enjoying himself, provided and endowed with the 5 cords of sensual pleasure, who, without abandoning craving for sensual pleasures, without removing fever for sensual pleasures, was able to abide free from thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace, or who is able, or will be able to do, or who will be able to so abide? No, Master Gotama. Good, Magandiya. I too have never seen or heard of a king or a king's minister enjoying himself, provided and endowed with the 5 cords of sensual pleasure, who, without abandoning craving for sensual pleasures, without removing fever for sensual pleasures, was able to abide free from thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace, or who is able, or who will be able to so abide. On the contrary, Magandiya, those recluses or Brahmins who abided or abide or will abide free from thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace, all do so after having understood as they actually are the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of sensual pleasures. And it is after abandoning craving for sensual pleasures and removing fever for sensual pleasures that they abided or abide or will abide free from thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace. Then at that point the Blessed One uttered this exclamation: The greatest of all gains is health. Nibbana is the greatest bliss. The Eightfold Path is the best of paths, for it leads safely to the deathless. When this was said, the wanderer Magandiya said to the Blessed One, It is wonderful, Master Gotama. It is marvelous how well that has been expressed by Master Gotama. The greatest of all gains is health. Nibbana is the greatest bliss. We too have heard this said by earlier wanderers in the tradition of the teachers, and it agrees, Master Gotama. But, Magandiya, when you heard that said by early wanderers in the tradition of the teachers, what is that health? What is that Nibbana? When this was said, the wanderer Magandiya rubbed his limbs with his hands and said, This is that health, Master Gotama. This is that Nibbana. For I am now healthy and happy, and nothing afflicts me. Magandiya, suppose there was a man born blind who could not see dark and light forms, who could not see blue, yellow, red, or pink forms, who could not see what was even and uneven, who could not see the stars or the sun and the moon. He might hear a man with good eyesight saying, Good indeed, sirs, is a white cloth, beautiful, spotless, and clean. And he would go in search of a white cloth. Then a man would cheat him with a dirty, soiled garment thus, Good man, here is the white cloth for you, beautiful, spotless, and clean. And he would accept it and put it on, and being satisfied with it, he would utter words of satisfaction thus, Good indeed, sirs, is a white cloth, beautiful, spotless, and clean. What do you think, Magandiya, when that man, born blind, accepted that dirty, soiled garment, put it on, and being satisfied with it, uttered words of satisfaction thus, Good indeed, sirs, is a white cloth, beautiful, spotless, and clean. Did he do so knowing and seeing, or out of faith in the man with good eyesight? Venerable sir, he would have done so unknowing and unseeing, out of faith in the man with good eyesight. So too, Magandiya, the wanderers of other sects are blind and visionless. They do not know health, they do not see Nibbana, yet they utter this stanza thus, The greatest of all gains is health. Nibbana is the greatest bliss. This stanza was uttered by the earlier accomplished ones, fully enlightened ones thus, The greatest of all gains is health. Nibbana is the greatest bliss. The Eightfold Path is the best of paths, for it leads safely to the deathless. Now it has gradually become current among ordinary people. And although this body, Magandiya, is a disease, a tumor, a dart, a calamity, and an affliction, referring to this body, you say, This is that health, Master Gotama. This is that Nibbana. You do not have that noble vision, Magandiya, by means of which you might know health and see Nibbana. I have confidence in Master Gotama thus. Master Gotama is capable of teaching me the Dhamma in such a way that I can come to know health and to see Nibbana. Magandiya, suppose there was a man born blind who could not see dark and light forms, who could not see the sun and the moon. Then his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relatives, would bring a physician to treat him. The physician would make a medicine for him, yet by means of that medicine, the man's vision would not arise or be purified. What do you think, Magandiya? Would that doctor reap weariness and disappointment? Yes, Master Gotama. So too, Magandiya, if I were to teach you the Dhamma thus, this is that health, this is that Nibbana, you might not know health or see Nibbana, and that would be wearisome and troublesome for me. I have confidence in Master Gotama thus. Master Gotama is capable of teaching me the Dhamma in such a way that I can come to know health and to see Nibbana. Magandiya, suppose there was a man born blind who could not see dark and light forms, or the sun and moon. He might hear a man with good eyesight saying, "Good indeed, sirs, is a white cloth, beautiful, spotless, and clean." And he would go in search of a white cloth. Then a man would cheat him with a dirty, soiled garment thus, "Good man, here is a white cloth for you, beautiful, spotless, and clean." And he would accept it and put it on. Then his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relatives, would bring a physician to treat him. The physician would make medicine, emetics and purgatives, ointments and counter-ointments, and a nasal treatment. And by means of that medicine, the man's vision would arise and be purified. Together with the arising of his vision, his desire and liking for that dirty, soiled garment would be abandoned. Then he might burn with indignation and enmity towards that man, and might think that he ought to be killed thus. Indeed, I have long been tricked, cheated, and defrauded by this man with this dirty, soiled garment, when he told me, "Good man, here is a white cloth for you, beautiful, spotless, and clean." So too, Magandiya, if I were to teach you the Dhamma thus, this is that health, this is that Nibbana, you might not know health and see Nibbana. Together with the arising of your vision, said it wrong. So too, Magandiya, if I were to teach you the Dhamma thus, this is that health, this is that Nibbana, you might know health and see Nibbana. Together with the arising of your vision, your desire and lust for the five aggregates affected by clinging might be abandoned. Then perhaps you might think, "Indeed, I have long been tricked, cheated, and defrauded by this mind. For when clinging, I have been clinging just to material form. I have been clinging just to feeling. I have been clinging just to perception. I have been clinging just to formations. I have been clinging just to consciousness. With my clinging as condition, being comes to be. With being as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. I have confidence in Master Gotama thus. Master Gotama is capable of teaching me the Dhamma in such a way that I might rise up from this seat cured of my blindness. Then, Magandiya, associate with true men. When you associate with true men, you will hear the true Dhamma. When you hear the true Dhamma, you will practice in accordance with the true Dhamma. When you practice in accordance with the true Dhamma, you will know and see for yourself thus. These are diseases, tumors, and darts. But here these diseases, tumors, and darts cease without remainder. With the cessation of my clinging comes cessation of being. With the cessation of being, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. When this was said, the wanderer Magandiya said, "Magnificent, Master Gotama, magnificent, Master Gotama. Master Gotama has made the Dhamma clear in many ways, as though he were turning upright what had been overthrown, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. I go to Master Gotama for refuge, and to the Dhamma and to the Sangha of bhikkhus. I would receive the going forth under Master Gotama. I would receive the full admission. Magandiya, one who formerly belonged to another sect and desires the going forth and the full admission in this Dhamma and discipline, lives on probation for 4 months. At the end of 4 months, if the bhikkhus are satisfied with him, they give him the going forth and the full admission to the bhikkhu state. But I recognize individual differences in this matter. Venerable Sir, if those who formerly belonged to another sect and desire the going forth and the full admission in this Dhamma and discipline live on probation for 4 months, and if at the end of the 4 months the bhikkhus, being satisfied with them, give them the going forth and the full admission to the bhikkhu state, then I will live on probation for 4 years. At the end of the 4 years, the bhikkhus are satisfied with me. Let them give me the going forth and the full admission to the bhikkhu state. Then the wanderer Magandiya received the going forth under the Blessed One, and he received the full admission. And soon, not long after his full admission, dwelling alone, withdrawn, diligent, ardent, and resolute, the Venerable Magandiya, by realizing for himself with direct knowledge, here and now entered upon and abided in that supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the home life into homelessness. He directly knew, birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more coming to any state of being, and the Venerable Magandiya became one of the Arhats. So there was another sutta I was thinking about. Maybe I'll save that for next time. There's definitely a lot of good stuff in this sutta. So if people have any questions or comments, anything they want to discuss.
I mean, it's not clear to me how much the historic, 2,600 years later, how these conversations actually went, but just an illustration of the Buddha's sort of brilliance, just to kind of keep at it, kind of keep working with someone who's quite difficult, and then eventually bring them to having faith in the Tathagata, and then, movement towards an arhat. Possibly, having extreme entry at the end of the talk. There's it just sort of shows his brilliance. Also, how he's able to just adapt to each different thing that Magandiya says, to be able to talk to him. So, yeah, it's just a very inspiring sutta, just to hear from that way that the Buddha just is able to really counter or help him arise to a particular understanding of the Dhamma.
Yeah, with spontaneous, when you think similes that he's able to come up with that so accurately point to the experience.
Yeah, the similes are pretty amazing.
They're wonderful.
The leper, the blind man, and pretty. There's really a lot there to contemplation.
That's very rich, super
powerful. I just always appreciate too that view or that standpoint of the enjoyment or the sensual pleasure, the pleasurable aspect of sensual indulgence is like a distortion of perception. Really seems, and there is, as he points out, there is a modicum of enjoyment, but the fact that burning oneself over, a pit, a charcoal pit, to relieve the itching, the pain of the sores of the leprosy, and then when he doesn't have the sores, it's a whole different perceptual experience. It's sort of like when you see clearly the long-term disadvantage and the aftermath of satisfying some sort of intense craving. Sort of like, oh God, how could have I thought that was going to be enjoyable? Just that, after you really overindulge in something or gratify some really intense sensual craving, within seconds usually after you've done that satisfaction or you've made that commitment to indulging and you do it, the sense of disappointment, of regret, of remorse, of God, why did I do? Because it's all over in time and it's gone. You know, the emptiness of it, essentially.
So there's always a price to pay,
Always.
but you don't see it.
You don't see it while you're getting going.
The hidden cost.
Yeah. And that sutta is just like incredibly perfect at pointing that out. Because the wounds just get more and more infected. The more infected you get, the more you want to gratify it, and the more you do that, then the worse they get. Again, it's just this vicious cycle.
Yeah, and it's a very worldly way of thinking about things. It's just that thing. I mean, it just continues to this day. There's been no change. The sensual pleasures of how could they not be the thing that we can rely on, or that are just good and pleasant for us. I also appreciate health, because that's also something that's pushed out into society, like health, without any other thoughts about it. If you're healthy, then that's all that really matters.
Right.
We strive for good health.
And here's what I know will make me healthy.
Yeah, my view.
Yeah, it's interesting because Magandiya, he liked that teaching, but for him, he's like, what do you say? This is that health. Like he's like, oh yeah, I don't have any disease right now. My body's feeling good.
Right.
And then the Buddha is. How would you say that the Buddha was, interpreting that, like health of the mind, health being free from kilesa? Would you say because the Buddha did pray, he praised that whole verse in its full with the last two lines about the eightfold path leading to the deathless, but.
Yeah, but then he says that's been picked up by...
It's been distorted by ordinary people.
Distorted and reinterpreted, misinterpreted.
Yeah.
If I remember, I don't know if it's there, or if I'm thinking of a different kind of set of teachings that used to be sort of based on some of the old, the old, more Hindu teachings or non-Buddhist teachings prior to the Buddha that had a similar kind of flavor to them, but then he picked up on them and kind of changed them a little. I don't know if he's referring to, referring to that process there, or if he's just referring to the fact that his teachings got subsequently distorted.
Well, he says the Buddha, Magandiya, praised the verse, but only the first two lines. The greatest of all gains is health. Nibbana is the greatest bliss. And then the Buddha said, you don't really understand what you're talking about.
Right.
And then he said that it was that 4-line verse, including the final 2 lines, the eightfold path is the best of paths, leads safely to the deathless. That was a verse of former Buddhas. It's way back in the ancient path. But only the first 2 verses.
Yeah, and then with a kind of a different idea of what Nibbana is probably too.
Yeah. But it was interesting how when he gives him the teaching at the end, he talks about basically the 5 aggregates of clinging being he basically says the 5 aggregates of clinging are a disease, a tumor, a dart, a calamity, and affliction, including the body. But then knowing where that clinging ceases, where disease, if that's disease, knowing where that disease ceases is probably in the Buddhist teaching, freedom, true freedom from disease. Knowing that state, or knowing Nibbana, where that happens.
From distorted perception, the disease that comes from disease that comes from that.
I was curious why this 6th sense is left out of the sensual desire list of the mind, but it's included earlier.
Yeah, that is a good point. It is the mind and mind objects. Sometimes they are, like you said, in certain lists, they're there because the mind does, it's talked about, have passion for ideas and infatuation with ideas. but then in many of the similes, it was the mind and dhammas was left out.
Yeah, I mean, particularly when he talks about the 5 chords of sensual pleasure,
Yeah.
That's always referring to the 5 physical sense bases. And I don't, it's a good question, and I'm not sure if I really know exactly why. I mean, maybe because they're, generally regarded as the most prominent, coarser level of sensual pleasure, and that, the mind base, the intellect, isn't quite at the same coarse level. It's not on the level of physical actualization, or like the by body, speech, or mind. The three avenues of making karma. You certainly can make plenty of mental karma by thinking sensual thoughts, but you're not really acting on the grossest level of bodily action, making bodily karma, which is the strongest in terms of the effect that it has. So, but why he doesn't include it, I don't know why he doesn't include the mind and the chords of sensual pleasure, unless it's just for that reason that the karma made at the mental level is, less impactful. I mean, it's still significant. And mind is the origin of, all of our suffering, but the actual expression in through the 5 senses is very significant.
I just had a thought about that it might be that, when he's talking about sensuality, it's the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. Those are maybe the most intense when it comes to sensuality. Forms, sights, sounds, smells, taste, touch, these things, that are wished for, desired, agreeable, provocative of lust and passion. But, it might be that the mind as a sense base, the mind and ideas, that seems to be, if it is sort of purely in the realm of ideas, that's could fall under the heading of like attachment to views, views, and which receives a whole lot of other attention in the Buddhist teaching, all different kinds of wrong view that people get themselves into. The nature of the self, the nature of the world. The world is finite, the world is infinite, and there's definitely infatuation, passion, and those sort of things connected with those sort of world views of self and views of the world, but maybe of a different, possibly of a different sort than
kind of a different nature,
sensuality.
Kind of a different category of. Yeah, he doesn't not talk about the dangers in that whole level of that sense base of the mind. Spends a lot of time talking about that, but not just in that kind of sensuality context.
I was just thinking that there's one place in the suttas, I can't remember where it is, but Andrew or Justin, you might find this interesting. He says that householders quarrel amongst each other based on sensuality, and like recluses or samanas or brahmins, religious people or philosophers or whatever, quarrel amongst each other based on views. So it's sort of a different kind of a domain of craving and competition, disputation. But
just pick it up and bring it with us. Find an avenue for expression.